There's been a plane crash here in New York City, and right now you're looking at live pictures of a U.S. Airways jetliner that went down in the Hudson River, an Airbus 320.
It has been more than 15 years since 155 people were rescued from the Hudson River after U.S. Airways Flight 1549 struck a flock of geese, forcing an emergency landing on the water. Everyone on board survived, and it was in part, largely, because of the actions of Captain Chesley Sully Sullenberger. Now a newly opened museum named in his honor revisits that day, and Sullenberger walked along with our Nancy Chin through for an exclusive visit.
When you stand here today and you look up at this, is it a good feeling?
Oh, absolutely. It's actually bigger than I remembered. I haven't seen it for a while. But yeah, it feels good.
We heard people say that they heard the sound of an engine explosion and that this appeared to be a controlled landing by the pilot.
The fact that it landed relatively flat, I think, is more than just good luck.
A decade and a half after he landed Flight 1549 on the Hudson River, Chesley Sullenberger, known to the world as simply Captain Sully, calls this Airbus A320 an old friend.
You were sitting right there.
Right there, left front seat.
The aircraft now on display in Charlotte, North Carolina's Sullenberger Aviation Museum, along with other tokens from that January 2009 journey.
You think about how the day started for you that day when you put that uniform on.
That day started literally like 10,000 other days. I had never experienced the failure of even a single engine. And at that point in my career, I thought it was unlikely it ever would happen to me. I was wrong.
They had just taken off from New York's LaGuardia Airport when they hit a flock of Canada geese. With no engine power, Sullenberger and First Officer Jeff Skiles guided the aircraft onto their only option, the water. All 155 people on board remarkably made it out alive.
It's been 15 years now. Do you still think of it often?
Yeah, I get almost daily reminders, good ones, when people recognize me and thank us for what we achieved that day.
Has your perception of what happened that day changed as you reflect?
Yes, it has, substantially. You know, early on, I had said in interviews that I thought we were doing our jobs. But I think now with the passage of time, it's apparent that we all did our jobs exceedingly well that day, better than probably could have been expected under those circumstances.
Deemed the miracle on the Hudson, it was celebrated around the world as a sign of hope.
You got any ideas?
Actually, no.
Hollywood came knocking too. Sullenberger's actions inspired Clint Eastwood's Sully, starring Tom Hanks. Letters from all 7 continents also poured in, many now on display at the museum, carefully collected by Sullenberger's wife, Lori.
You read these letters out loud to your children, to your kids as a family. Why did you read those letters out loud?
We were really reading them to Sully for him to understand.
I hadn't seen any of them at that point.
And so we were trying to give him a sense of how the world was receiving the accident. I think it was still haunting him, the whole accident itself. And so that was the other part of reading the letters. He needed to work his way through all of that, and the letters were a really helpful way to do that.
For Sullenberger, the miracle also represented 208 seconds of agony and the unbearable hours-long wait for confirmation that everyone survived.
You've also talked about dealing with mental health struggles immediately after the incident. Does this museum and donating some of these artifacts provide some sense of closure in that?
Oh, absolutely it does. And yeah, we all on the airplane and our families experienced a very stressful event that could have been catastrophic. But with time, I finally achieved the kind of insight I needed to put my mind at rest. And that was that we had done the best we could. That was our solace then, and it remains our solace now.
A year after the flight, Sullenberger retired from U.S. Airways, but he continues to champion aircraft safety today, something the Sullenberger Aviation Museum highlights, along with a rich history of flight itself and a peek at its future, with an emphasis on introducing children to STEM education.
To Flight 1549, hear, hear.
Hear, hear.
On hand for its opening, passengers from Charlotte-bound Flight 1549.
Yeah, that's me right there. And that's Mike.
Many remain in touch with one another and Sullenberger.
These are my shoes that I took off before I jumped into the Hudson.
That includes Barry Leonard, whose personal items, including the Yankees hat he was wearing that day, are now on display.
Why did you want to donate your belongings?
Because I want people that visit here to really get a human aspect on what this is all about. So you see these things that were in my closet for 15 years, and then to actually see them here, which I didn't expect them to, is just overwhelming and very emotional.
Yeah. Why is that?
Because we all know that we could have not made it. Yeah.
Their reunion, a reminder of the extraordinary experience these 155 people went through together.
What do you hope that future generations take away from this space?
That we each have obligations to each other as citizens, because it's when we work together we solve big problems, when we share common values, common purpose, and a common humanity.
A miracle extending far beyond the Hudson. For CBS Saturday Morning, Nancy Chen, Charlotte, North Carolina.
That image of them standing on the wing, just every time you see it, takes your breath away.
It's amazing. Remember, he lost both engines. Air traffic control directed him back to runway 13 at LaGuardia. Chesley said, Sully said, unable,
right?
and calmly guided the plane into the river.
We all need heroes.
Amazing.
The Tenement Museum in Lower Manhattan pays tribute to those often invisible citizens of America, immigrant workers who struggled through poverty to make a place for themselves in a new land, one that claimed to welcome outsiders but offered many obstacles along the way. A new exhibit explores the identities of those left out and left behind and why it's relevant today. So this was an actual tenement.
This building, was a tenement from 1863 to 1935. People lived here.
Just imagine.
Oh, these are narrow.
Stepping back in time.
There was no light in this hallway originally.
Seeing how the other half lived a century and a half ago.
And there are 20 families that live in the building.
People struggling to eke out an existence in cramped quarters with poor ventilation and no indoor plumbing.
Between 1940 and 1960, over 1 million Puerto Ricans coming to New York.
For 35 years, New York's Tenement Museum has tried to preserve the history of the immigrant. Poor, anonymous, newly minted citizens searching for a better life, often serving the needs of Manhattan's rich and famous.
Here we see Joseph P. Moore.
Kat Lloyd is curator.
He's a waiter. He was an Irish immigrant who lived in this building, 97 Orchard Street.
Since its founding, only those who actually lived in this building, like the Irish Joseph Moore, were given the museum treatment until patrons noticed something else.
Visitors looking at this record started to ask about the Joseph Moore listed directly above and ask questions about the racial designation that we see next to his name. People wanted to know, right, what were the experiences of Irish immigrants and Black New Yorkers?
Those questions sparked a new exhibit on that other Joseph Moore, one that Mellon graduate fellow Marquise Taylor was hired to investigate.
So Joseph Moore was an African-American man that was born in Belvedere, New Jersey in 1838, and he decided to come to New York in 1857. And he was a man who worked as a waiter. He also worked as a coachman because work for Black men during that time was seasonal. And he decided to establish a home at 17 Lawrence Street with his wife, Rachel Moore.
But the Moores, who were Catholic too, weren't the only Black people living in tenements in Lower Manhattan back then.
In the process of research, we looked at our own archive, and that's when we found the letter from Jean Emanuel.
Jean Emanuel wrote that letter as a concerned citizen in 1988, the year the museum opened.
She talked about her family's history, that her family had lived in Lower Manhattan, that they had worked on the South Street Seaport. And so she asked the museum when we were founding it to please include the stories of Black New Yorkers, particularly living in tenement apartments in Lower Manhattan.
3 decades later, there are mementos from Manuel's family.
These are all objects that belonged to her great-grandmother, Parthenia Lawrence, who was a Black New Yorker, lived in tenements in the 1860s.
These are tiny little books.
I know.
Items that conjure the personal lives of those who once possessed them.
Maybe most important is this object in the center here, this book of Abraham Lincoln's speeches. And to think about a book of Abraham Lincoln's speeches being read in a tenement home, that's so different than how we tend to learn about the Civil War. We wanted to know what were the conversations among free Black New Yorkers in the 1860s as these changes in the nation were taking place.
It turns out that Jean Emanuel's ancestors and the Moores were actually neighbors.
Front building and back building of the same exact address in 1870. And so almost certainly they knew each other, would have seen each other in the courtyard, and that really inspired us to dig into this neighborhood further.
It led them to Moore's long-lost relative.
Nothing ever pinpointed to New York City until I went to the Tenement Museum, and once they showed me all of their research, it kind of like started all clicking.
Ashley Pinkowski had been hitting dead ends while tracing her family tree.
This was not passed down to our family. This is all things that I really had to find out on my own.
She suspects work was the primary motive for the move to the Big Apple. Taylor says clues suggest another motive.
We had discovered a newspaper article that talked about a Black man who had lived in New Jersey, the same community as Joseph Moore. This is at the same time that the fugitive slave law had been in effect, which basically incentivized, an entire market of recapturing people and bringing them further back south.
Joseph Moore holds an even deeper connection for Taylor.
I actually went to high school just 2 blocks north of 17 Lawrence Street. When I was in high school, I actually went to the Tenement Museum and I took a tour, and I actually thought that African American history didn't have a place in the Lower Manhattan.
The place the Moores called home has been recreated inside the museum.
An article mentioned that he had a portrait of Abraham Lincoln on his wall. And so we have a portrait of Abraham Lincoln on the mantle.
A 2-room flat that the census shows was occupied by the couple, their daughter, and 2 other people.
An Irish woman named Rose Brown, and then Rose's 14-year-old son, Louis, who is one of the many New Yorkers who has a Black father and an Irish immigrant mother. So they probably sleep in the kitchen space, actually, right? They would have mattresses here in the closet that they would pull out at night.
Oftentimes you have in 19th century New York City, African Americans and Irish people living alongside one another. Both groups were sort of deemed undesirable to people who were often leasing and renting properties. You have to understand that they are also competing usually for jobs, for housing, so that creates some sort of tension as well.
Tension that by 1863 led to the violence and terror of the Civil War draft riots. 25% of the Black population fled Lower Manhattan to other parts of the city.
This article talks about a white proprietor in Lower Manhattan who actually laid off his Black staff, because of the fear of mob violence during this time.
It's a fuller picture of a time nearly erased by the physical progress of a new century. A history now open to everyone.
And that's what I love about the museum, is that visitors asking questions inspires us, right? We do new research, we create new tours, and that it's this dynamic that keeps things really fresh.
And the museum just brings so much to life, the context of the people living in that era. I tell you, it really gives you a sense of how we all got together and sometimes didn't.
So many stories, and that letter of asking, please don't forget them. I thought that was really...
And I like that they keep learning, too, when visitors ask them questions. It leads them to learn more.
Certainly does.
Yeah, fascinating story. Thank you, Michelle.
They're often the last article of clothing we put on, but they're still a vital part of our wardrobe. And for the first time, annual global spending on shoes is expected to top $400 billion. Shoes are a statement of style, personality, and identity. And nowhere is that better showcased than the venue we visited just north of the border.
This is a fan favorite for sure. It is a Louis Vuitton shoe trunk.
Oh my God.
And so if you were to go on a, say, jaunt around the world, this would be one of the trunks that you would take with you and just to hold your shoes.
Oh my God.
This 1920s shoe trunk is just one of an array of pieces on display at Toronto's Bata Shoe Museum, where Elizabeth Semmelheck is the director and senior curator.
Even if you give me a single pair of shoes and you tell me that I need to research this, not only am I going to look at its structure and think about the time period in which it was designed, but who designed it, Who made it? Who made the materials? There are so many lenses that you could apply to just a single pair of shoes.
The museum was born out of the shoe collection of businesswoman and philanthropist Sonia Bada. It houses nearly 15,000 shoes and related artifacts that trace the evolution of footwear.
Prior to industrialization, a shoemaker could only make a handful of shoes a week. And so that meant that shoes were expensive. So industrialization did many things. It sped up production. But as it sped up production, it also lowered price points.
And gave rise to the celebrity shoe designer.
In the 30s, designers take off. For example, Ferragamo makes the wedge heel in the 30s. The platform comes back in the 30s.
The museum even considers the origin of a style staple for the well-heeled.
At the end of the 30s, of course, World War II breaks out. And what are soldiers putting up in their barracks? Images of Varga girls wearing thin heels. And so it should come as no surprise,
of course,
that after World War II,
yes,
it is the stiletto that is invented. One of the most famous shoe designers of the stiletto was Roger Vivier. And he was the shoe designer for Christian Dior, and this is one of his designs.
It's beautiful, but by the way, does not even look high enough.
Do you know what these are? The stiletto, as we know it today, stepped into pop culture.
They don't fit, so help me, I'm gonna wear them anyway.
And onto the screen in the long-running HBO series Sex and the City.
I do love the high heels with the crystals and the glimmer. But
actress Bridget Moynihan made her TV debut as Natasha on the show.
Hi, it's a pleasure to meet you. I've heard so much about you.
Where the designs of Jimmy Choo, Manolo Blahnik, and the like were more than just accessories.
Now, the heels are almost high enough to put me face to face with Natasha.
Helping spark a shoe fascination for Moynihan, which eventually blossomed into a book, Our Shoes, Ourselves.
it started with emptying my closet and realizing that 99% of the shoes in my closet I never wear and I can never wear again.
Right.
And I decided I was going to donate them and get rid of them. But as I was putting each pair into a box, I kept retaking them out because, well, this one had a special moment. This was at, you know, some premiere, or these pair were from Sex and the City, or another pair was my trip to Africa with my mom. And so everyone had a memory attached to them. And that's why I was holding on to them.
In the book, 40 accomplished women share memories related to the shoes that mean the most to them.
We had an astronaut, a 4-star general, and a senator who was in Iraq.
Yeah.
If you earn those combat boots, it becomes like part of your core. It becomes part of your identity.
Yeah.
And I think that what was a common thread was that everybody in their own way felt empowered by those shoes.
Power derived from shoes is something that until recently had been reserved for men.
Is it the short socks?
No, Morris.
Money's gotta be the shoes. Shoes.
While the idea of women collecting shoes has been subject to ridicule or dismissed as an indulgence. At the Bada Shoe Museum, that notion is being questioned.
Why do we dismiss women and their shoe consumption as irrational and frivolous when in fact it's a multi-billion-dollar business?
Right.
When you think about Air Jordans, Air Jordan 1, Air Jordan 2, Air Jordan 3, it creates a quote-unquote rational structure for collecting that mirrors other forms of men's collecting.
The museum's recent sneaker collection even provided a way to go back to the future.
The Nike Mag started its life as an idea and was a movie prop. So it was in the movie Back to the Future 2.
Our laces, all right.
And everybody went crazy. But it took until 2015 to find a battery that was small enough yet powerful enough to actually do auto lacing.
Till the real time the movie was made.
Yeah.
The future. Unbelievable.
As for our future, that means considering sustainability in our footwear, with more than 20 billion pairs of shoes manufactured each year. One solution may be artificial leather made from mushrooms.
You get a pattern for the latest design, you put your last in, you add some fungus spores, A little bit of corn and a little bit of water, and your shoe grows overnight. And then you can compost it at the end of the day. I think it's a brilliant idea.
I'm looking into the future right
Yeah,
now.
exactly.
It's amazing. Reminding us of the balancing act built into our shoes, no matter the material, size, or color. Is footwear function, or is it fashion? Or when did it change?
Well, I don't think footwear has ever just been function. Even the ability to afford shoes automatically suggests status. And I think that if it was simply just protection, we would all be in flip-flops all summer long, and we're not. There's so much different choice. And so I think that the same impulses that we have within our current society of differentiating ourselves from one another and doing part of that work through our footwear choice has been a part of that history of shoes going back to time immemorial.
So a couple things I want to say. 20 billion pairs of shoes manufactured each year. That's like 2.5 per person on this planet. So think about that. And sometimes you don't even realize that you're making a statement with your shoes. Mine today, I didn't have Honolulu blue to wear for the Lions.
Who are you wearing?
I don't even remember who they are, but I'll tell you, it's the color.
Is that what you say?
This silver is for my Lions.
Okay.
So you make statements, whether anybing else realizes it or not, you can do that. I know. Michelle, what statement are you making?
Wearing?
I'm just saying.
You're saying I'm a badass, is what you're saying. No, it is amazing. You may not think about it, Elizabeth says, but as you're putting on a pair of shoes, throughout time, we always have made statements, whether we've meant to or not.
Yeah, I just want to say there's no price tag on the bottom of this red
That's
bottom.
good. That's really good.
That was cool.
Thank you for that.
Yes.
Thank you for that. And Bridget's book, that she's co-author of, is really fascinating, with each story that these women tell and the shoes that represent a story and a part of their life.
The French fashion house Chanel is one of the most recognized brands in the world. Opening her first shop in 1910, its founder, designer Coco Chanel, has been credited with changing the way women dressed forever. Now London's Victoria and Albert Museum is holding a major sold-out retrospective on Chanel's life and designs. As Holly Williams found out, amid the style, the designer's life was one of massive contradictions, from Nazi collaboration and anti-Semitism to assisting the French resistance.
It's a name that for more than a century has been synonymous with glamour and celebrity, with understated luxury.
The height of chic for evening wear as a hostess or on the town.
And above all, with French chic.
Are you wearing the
Chanel boots? Yeah, I am.
You look good.
Even if you're not a fashionista, the designs of the House of Chanel have become so iconic they may have entered your consciousness. The quilted handbag, two-tone ballet flats,
Chanel number 5.
Chanel number 5, and the timeless tweed suit.
We think of this as being very classic. It wasn't classic. This was new, right?
Well, absolutely. And the interesting thing about the Chanel jacket, as you can see, it's always recognizably Chanel, but always slightly different.
A new blockbuster show in London, Fashion Manifesto, goes back to Chanel's roots to show how the label revolutionised the way women dress.
So this is, I'm guessing, the little black dress.
You can see the central piece here. It dates from 1919, which is quite incredible because it's really something that could be worn today.
The fact that you and I are both sitting here wearing trousers is thanks to Coco Chanel.
Really?
When she started designing, women were wearing long dresses, corsets, feathers. They were literally constrained by the clothes that they wore, and Chanel gave them freedom.
Justine Picardy is a fashion historian who wrote a book about the woman behind the brand, the late Coco Chanel. Born into poverty in small-town France and sent to live in an orphanage run by nuns when her mother died, Coco Chanel went to work as a seamstress and as a cabaret singer, beginning a series of affairs with aristocratic men, including the Duke of Westminster.
She wasn't respectable enough
Yes.
for an aristocrat to marry.
There's an apocryphal story that she said there have been many Duchesses of Westminster, but only one Coco Chanel.
What extraordinary self-possession to say something like that.
She also had the courage to launch her own business at a time when the odds were stacked against her.
When she started her career in 1909, 1910, women still didn't have the right to vote in France. They didn't get the right to vote until 1945. So to be a successful female entrepreneur was really unheard of.
But Chanel's reputation has been tarnished by her romantic relationship with a German intelligence officer when France was occupied by the Nazis during the Second World War. She also tried to use Nazi laws to strip her Jewish business partners of their assets. Picardy believes Coco Chanel started the affair to get her nephew Andre out of a Nazi prisoner of war camp, and says Andre may actually have been Chanel's son, born out of wedlock. She's also uncovered evidence that Chanel, a friend of Winston Churchill, was secretly working for the French resistance against the Nazis.
Was she an anti-Semite?
As with so much of Chanel, she's complicated. I wouldn't want to be black and white about her. You know, she said some terrible things, but I can say, hand on heart, she was not a Nazi.
Whatever the truth of Chanel's Nazi connections, her impact on fashion is unquestionable. After her death in 1971, the house she established lived on and has kept evolving. That famous logo, an entwined pair of C's, has branded everything from surfboards to motorbike helmets.
There's always, the CC logo, probably one of the most recognizable logos on the planet. You know, you look at CC and you see Chanel.
It sounds like you're saying it's a kind of masterclass in branding.
Coco Chanel was a sort of maestro in branding, like before the word brand even existed.
Susie Lau is a fashion journalist and influencer. In recent years, she told us, Chanel has found a massive new market in Asia, where it now earns more than half of its revenue.
There'll be vintage shops in Japan and Korea, which are just dedicated to Chanel, particularly rare items of Chanel, and the prices are like eye-watering. They would be 3 or 4 times what they were in the store.
Does that mean that it's art?
I think a lot of Chanel items do cross over into that art territory. A lot of them feel very much like objects rather than apparel.
Coco Chanel's personal history is still being debated by historians, in stark contrast to the beautiful simplicity of her work.
Just how complicated is her legacy?
There's something very pure about her legacy in terms of the design. The language of Chanel, Coco Chanel, the designer, is very pure. It's not muddied at all, but the legacy of the woman is very complex.
For CBS Saturday Morning, Holly Williams, London.
Every single one of those dresses I would wear.
I know. I was thinking that too. Right now. Right now. But what a great.
And there's the complication.
Yes.
Because when you hear the question, was she an anti-Semite? And the answer is, well, it's complicated. It's not really the answer.
And it
you
is what she said at the end, though, that the person, that's muddied. And that part is something that you're going to continue to look at and say, this isn't good. But you look at the simplicity and the beauty of her dresses and the branding she created before it happened. It's unbelievable.
Yeah,
Can't
and
debate
yet,
that.
to your point, I don't own a single Chanel piece.
Nor do I. Nor do I.
I told you about a unique auction item, a pair of tickets to Ford's Theater for April 14th, 1865. As any history buff will know, it was the night Abraham Lincoln was in the audience and lost his life to an assassin's bullet. The tickets sold for $262,500, well above the opening price. The winning bidder is a familiar name to sports fans. Scott McFarland takes us to Washington to meet the ticket's new owner.
Inside the intimate Ford's Theater near the White House, days after the end of the Civil War, the presentation of Our American Cousin was to be a moment of celebration and joy, with Abraham Lincoln in the president's box. He came here that night to unwind.
He did, absolutely. It's one of his favorite things to do.
April 14th, 1865, a date students of history know quite well. Confederate sympathizer John Wilkes Booth broke into the unguarded box, shot Lincoln, and barreled down to the stage.
And all of a sudden, you have chaos unfolding here in the crowd. People on the first floor are clambering up onto the stage to get after Booth and to also get up into that box.
An attack that National Park Service ranger and historian Garrett Koss says left an indelible mark on the nation. This summer, when a Boston auction house put up for sale what it said were a pair of front-row tickets on the upper level to the show, they expected the tickets could yield more than $60,000. And were they right?
Here they are right here.
These tickets, you ended up paying nearly $250,000, and you would have went higher?
I would have went higher.
Jim Irsay won the auction, and if his name rings a bell, you might be a football fan. Jim Irsay owns the Indianapolis Colts, and the football team is just one of the interesting things he owns.
It's a service of the arts to the community.
When our Vladimir Duthier met with Irsay this year, he found Irsay is a one-man museum with a $100 million collection that includes a Muhammad Ali championship belt, a Bob Dylan guitar, and an Abraham Lincoln pocket knife. And now, tickets to Our American Cousin, which became Our American Tragedy.
But to really have two mint condition tickets that were there that night.
You just realize you're holding history.
There's no question. I mean, history right here.
Inside Ford's Theater, they welcome tourists from across the world each year as they teach about April 14, 1865. But they also have new shows year-round as they try to build more than just a history, but also a future. For CBS Saturday Morning, Scott McFarland, Washington.
If I could go back in time, that would be one of the things I would have changed. What if he had lived? I mean, the nation would be a lot different, I think.
262,500. That's what Mr. Irsay, what Jim Irsay paid for those tickets. And I was saying during the piece, you have to have his kind of money to collect the way that he does.
Some of the people on our show have seen his full collection, everything he has, the guitars. It's
executive producer being one of them.
Amazing stuff.
Artist Glenn Kaino lives at the intersection of technology and creativity. Known as a digital pioneer, he'll use just about any medium to make a point. And that now includes virtual reality. It's used in his new Los Angeles exhibition, Aki's Market, which covers a subject he's never explored, his own family history. You're almost like a Trojan horse in your approach. I mean, you kind of go in to a place, a moment, undercover.
In a way, yeah, I guess so. Go in presumes that I'm coming out also in terms of like leaving. And for me, it's just an accumulation, of the orbit that makes the studio what we do here.
Artist Glenn Kaino's studio is a massive 16,000 square foot warehouse in Glendale, California, filled to the brim with the kind of art that makes him tick.
We have a robotics lab, a VR stage. So, yeah.
What is this space?
It's a space where we can make anything, really.
Kaino draws, sculpts, designs huge installations. He's even directed an Emmy-nominated feature film.
Okay, stop. Open your eyes.
And conceived this work on a seminal moment at the 1968 Olympics. And this, it goes on into infinity.
Yeah, so this to me represents like the legacy of Tommy in terms of, the infinite. It was an icon and a symbol of strength, and so much so that I had a 4x5-inch photo of it taped to the corner of my iMac. And a friend of mine walked in and said, "Coach Smith, you want to meet him?" And I was like, "What are you talking about, Coach Smith?" And so he texts him and comes back 2 minutes later and he says, "They want to meet you."
Encounters like that inspired amazing collaborations. Take his meeting with former Irish politician Gerry Adams and the late Congressman John Lewis. Both led to his take on their shared history
and a rendition of U2's Sunday, Bloody Sunday.
Sunday, Bloody Sunday.
I try to use beauty and awe to get people to engage with work and then ask the question about why I made it and ask the question of what it means.
Kaino is internationally known for his expansive vision and activist mindset.
When I got out of grad school, the world offered me a bunch of binaries. They said you could do media or art. And I said, why do I have to choose? Why can't I do both?
So he did. He went on to host gallery shows at the same time he was running several startups.
Farm Club, the only record label that makes house calls.
Jimmy Iovine tapped him for Napster. Oprah Winfrey hired him for her network.
If you're running a tech company and you say, oh, I'm an artist, they go, you make paintings in the corner and you sell them and show them to your friends.
So the image in people's minds never fit with who you were and what you were doing.
And the levels that I was trying to achieve for both worlds, right? Because again, these are not small steps, these are big steps.
Giant leaps.
Kaino grew up in East Los Angeles, feeling lost.
I was kicked out of 5 high schools, kicked out of my house, and I spent a lot of time trying to figure out who I was.
Do you believe art saved your life?
Oh, 100% art saved my life.
Do you remember what led you out?
I picked up a notepad and I started drawing and doodling and journaling, and I started writing down everything that was frustrating to me about the world.
One place that gave him that space as a young artist,
I used to come to eat here 3 to 5 times a week.
the Suhiro Cafe in Little Tokyo.
Every night we would come here, there would be, every booth would be a different group of artists, musicians, writers, coming up with new ideas. This street has, I would say, double meaning.
He's spending a lot of time in that community lately, reconnecting with his roots.
Right on Central Street and this street is where all the Japanese Americans were lined up to be imprisoned in internment camps during World War II.
And at the Japanese American National Museum.
This show has been really important for me because I'm finding another expression of my voice, a more direct expression, so to speak.
Installing a virtual reality model of his grandfather's business.
Through the windows?
Yeah, through the windows.
Oh, wow.
It's called Aki's Market.
You got your fresh fruit? Wish I could get that mango.
When my grandmother first put it on, she said, I spent a lot of years in there. And she took it off and then she was
crying.
The market was a lifeline for his family after their internment in the war nearly destroyed their American dream.
My grandfather was a legendary football player who got accepted into Occidental College and couldn't pursue his collegiate career because he was imprisoned in the concentration camps of World War II. My family was in a horse stable in Santa Anita Racetrack for 9 months with the stench.
What are you hoping your grandfather's story will tell about you, your people, your experience?
What I'm trying to do is unpack and understand more about transgenerational trauma, how his generation being incarcerated affected my parents' generation and how that affected me.
It all makes logical sense, but it doesn't make emotional sense.
Okay.
He's also engaged in education, and along with fellow activist and actor Jesse Williams, created a gaming platform that puts culture first.
We have to be stewards of our own cultural communication.
From emojis that represent the diversity of users to an app called Homeschooled that teaches history.
I remember during COVID when there's homeschooling, I'm watching my son kind of seem like he's not paying attention, he's playing something else, but kids absorb information in many different ways and they don't always have to demonstrate a visual focus. Glenn was pivotal in kind of reminding me about how much information can be put forth while also feeling like you're at play.
You guys are working with one of the biggest quiz companies around.
When they revealed to us that we were the first team ever to consider non-white male audiences for the answers for questions, it just gave us more passion and direction to accomplish, success.
Another success, his presence at the Pace Galleries.
And I often think when I walk into this space and the space in New York, if my grandfather could see me now.
He'd find a grandson in search of understanding.
So this is a clock, am I right about that?
It's a clock, yeah.
And connection.
So you're sort of deconstructing
and then reconstructing. Exactly, all at the same time.
With anyone who comes into contact with his work.
What I've found consistently is that we are all more alike than we are different. And everyone's stories are much more similar than they think, even though the texture of them might be different. I think the heart of our stories are very similar.
And the heart of his story is incredible. I mean, he's a magician. He survived an avalanche with his family for 4 days. What's so incredible is that he has come from the depths of despair to great heights. And I just think about all the kids who could have been lost, who are lost. And he got a second chance and moved beyond. And look what he has given to the world.
Well,
this contribution.
I love that when he was saying he was coming out of school, he didn't take this idea that you have to be one or the other, that he said, yeah, okay, I'm going to do both. And then look at the contributions he's already made.
I was just going to say that he said he was given a choice. You have to choose media or art.
Right.
And he's like, I'm going to do both.
No, thank you.
Boxing us in. Don't box us in.
All around the globe, there are museums of art and museums of natural history. But here in New York State, there's an institution dedicated to fun and games. The Strong National Museum of Play in Rochester showcases the world of play. It houses an extensive collection of toys, games, and artifacts, and a new interactive edition covering the evolution of video games. And that's definitely where Jamie Wax wanted to begin his tour.
Welcome to the Mecca of play. A space where your inner child can let loose, and the games of your dreams are quite literally larger than life.
Oh, man, that was painful.
So close. It's these reimagined interactive exhibits that fill the Strong National Museum of Play in Rochester, New York.
Steve, I feel like I'm in the middle of a video game right now.
Steve Dubnick has been CEO of the museum since 2017 and is overseeing the current expansion.
What is this expansion going to do for this place, adding 90,000 more square feet?
So play is an ever-evolving topic, right? And how people play changes constantly. And we saw in the mid-2000s that video games was an area that people were really using to evolve their play forms into. And so as video games grew as a topic and how people play, we needed a way to collect and preserve that history. And we just really ran out of room in our existing facility to do that.
In the expansion wing, visitors will find supersized versions of their favorite video games, explore the interactive exhibits, and learn the history of the technology.
This is the periodic table behind us and next to us of video game elements. Just tell me, this is sort of like the science of play, basically, right?
So every game you play, you're doing something. You're moving, or you're solving, or you're creating, and so on. And so our academic team really recognized that and came up with this concept of forming that into a periodic table of video game elements.
In addition to the expansion, there's still plenty of room for older games and toys, like early versions of Barbie, as play historian and vice president for exhibits John Paul Dyson showed us.
This is Charles Darrow's round Monopoly set from his own home from the 30s, and everything is handwritten, hand-drawn on this.
This is the very first version of Monopoly that he created.
We also got to explore the vast basement area of the museum.
This is a chance for us to really preserve and document the history of play in all its forms,
which houses an array of pinball treasures, oddities, and some original designs.
We had the prototype for Tickle Me Elmo here in the museum. Actually went through a couple different versions, but one of the guys who created it, this guy Greg Hyman, he also created this toy Alfie, which was one of the first electronic toys. Yeah. And here you can see not only the finished product, but also the first prototype here, which is amazing.
We sat down to discuss all of these things and the very serious nature of play.
What's the definition of play to you?
To me, at least, on some level, play is fun. If we're not having a good time, we maybe are not playing. We learn so much when we play. We build friendships when we play. It's how we learn to deal with the way life just throws curveballs at us. When you see children playing, they're learning how to deal with a world that changes all the time. And so as adults, we take those skills and hopefully we keep playing too.
When the museum was founded in 1969, it was originally called Margaret Woodbury Strong's Museum of Fascination. Since then, the museum has adapted the play mission, acquiring the National Toy Hall of Fame. Today, there are playgrounds, a reading adventure, and even a rope course to explore.
So there's interactive elements, whether that's you're pretending to be in a pet, instead of pet care center, or you're playing a video game that was maybe one you played when you were younger. It's a great chance to animate play in a museum setting. It's a little bit different than most museums.
Yeah.
And that difference is one that can definitely be felt Playfully, yes, but also meaningfully.
What can we learn from play that might help move us forward?
Play is this wonderful means of just bringing people together. And you see that on a playground. It doesn't matter their background, they're just playing together. And so, in that sense, I think play is a model that it's not about what I'm getting. It's about the experience overall, and how can we make this a joyous experience for all of us.
For CBS Saturday Morning, Jamie Wax, Rochester, New York.
Did you see that daddy saddle? That was just kicks.
I'm gonna get a daddy saddle.
You would be perfect.
Very nice.
I haven't seen an Atari machine in a while.
I hadn't seen an Atari machine in a while. I did not see NHL 94 in the museum, but maybe it's there.
Not Tempest or Centipede.
Greatest video game of all time.
No,
I think
those
we can
two
all
were.
agree. Yeah.
The wedding of John F. Kennedy and Jacqueline Bouvier was the social event of the season. 70 years ago this week, the dress the future First Lady wore launched her reputation as a style icon, adding publicity and recognition to fashion designers worldwide. Everyone but the American designer who started it all. But a new exhibit that opened this week hopes to right that historic injustice. Anne Lowe, American courtier, puts the spotlight on a woman who designed dresses for much of high society.
The young senator poses for the first time with his wife.
It was a society page sensation. Every detail of Jacqueline Kennedy's wedding mentioned, save the name of her designer. And so Anne Lowe lost her moment in 1953.
Wow, that is quite the portrait.
She's reclaiming it now.
She is what this exhibit is about, and we needed to put her first, and then the gowns.
Lowe's designs are the featured attraction at the Winchester Museum.
The sheer magnitude of this collection astounds me.
Alexandra Deutsch is its co-curator.
I think it's a testament to the range of what Lowe designed. I mean, you're looking in this case from the 1920s into the 1960s. This is one designer.
The Wilmington, Delaware estate was once home to the DuPont family, some of whom were Lowe's clients, along with the heir to a cereal fortune, Marjorie Meriwether Post.
So much of her story is marked by her ambition and her determination.
FIT fashion historian Elizabeth Way researched Lowe for nearly a decade.
When you think of Anne Lowe in the history of America, define what she means.
Anne Lowe absolutely helped shape American fashion culture. She made these dresses that were photographed, that were looked at, that were coveted, that were copied. She's always right in line with what's happening in fashion. But for all these looks, we see this elegance, we see this embellishment style that is extravagant but not excessive. And also you see her enormous skill. All of these hand details. She would bead, she would applique. Her skill set was immense.
Born in segregated Montgomery, Alabama.
She learned from her grandmother and her mother, who were both professional dressmakers, and she worked since she was 6 years old.
She moved to Florida, set up her own atelier in Tampa, and in 1928 headed to New York for design school.
Even though she was really well respected and beloved among Tampa society, she wanted something bigger.
For 2 more decades, she created gowns for balls, concerts, even the 1946 Oscars. Olivia de Havilland accepted her award in an Anne Lowe design. Too delicate to move from its home at the JFK Library, Jackie's original bridal gown had to be replicated for this exhibit.
I looked at all the work that's going to be in the dress, and I just knew that I needed student help.
University of Delaware professor Katya Rolls was tapped for the honor, and her summer fashion scholars were floored.
Well, what did you guys learn?
Well, I learned that hand sewing is really hard and very tedious. It wasn't until you're in the moment of working where you can feel her dedication.
Oh, wow.
Right down to the accent of her blue-bowed petticoat.
We primarily worked on the rosettes, which may not sound like too much, but it was at least 50 hours of work.
Not quite the time Lowe originally put into it. Turns out 10 days before the wedding, Kennedy's dress and 10 of her 15 bridesmaids were destroyed in a flood in Lowe's dress shop.
Just to think of her resolve to do it once and have to do it again is really testament to who she was.
Known for her own signature style, all-black classic shifts with hat, Lowe's great-granddaughter says distinction was her mantra.
She would say, and even if you go out to empty the garbage, you don't ever set foot out the door without dressing to the nines.
Wow. We reunited Linda Dixon with Charmin Petty.
Trimmings.
Petty's parents, Benjamin and Ione Stoddard, owned the Madison Avenue store that featured Lowe's designs.
My mom had saved all of these. In 1962, they started with Miss Lowe. She had been at Saks. She had her own shop right down the street on Madison.
And helped her get back on her feet.
At that point in time, she was having a lot of health issues. She was in her middle 60s. She had very bad...
She had glaucoma and
She had glaucoma, and she couldn't sketch anymore. She really needed someone to back her, to promote her, and to help her get orders. So my mother was very good at that.
In the December issue of Saturday...
So good, she landed a spread in the Saturday Evening Post.
Society's best kept secret. Would you give her a nice welcome, please, Miss?
And a network TV interview on the Mike Douglas Show.
The color, Anne, is...
Plum satin.
Plum satin.
And the jewels, that's hand beaded.
That brought in new business, including a rather highbrow wedding in Washington, D.C. for the daughter of Dr. Robert Mance.
My father-in-law was always into fashion and had exquisite taste in clothes.
Diane Mance, Betty Wooden, and Sybil Gant were all Elizabeth's bridesmaids.
What did it fit like?
It fit perfectly.
Mine fit like a glove. I didn't have to do anything. I just put it on and walked out the door.
Detail. Oh, that's done by hand.
Quite the compliment from Betty Wooden, considering her grandmother was a professional seamstress.
I mean, that detail was phenomenal. It was unbelievable.
What was your first impression?
I was very impressed. Madison Avenue in the 60s, very impressed.
Black woman.
Yes.
Owns her own business.
That's correct. And a lovely person.
Lowe died in 1981, but for historian Elizabeth Way, her legacy lives on through the designers that come behind her.
This is Sully. She was really known for creating the modern wedding dress, that beautiful streamlined dress that is still so influential today.
B. Michael.
B. Michael is focusing on couture just the way Anne Lowe did.
He even has her name.
He designed this especially for Dawn Davis to wear to the Met Gala.
How much is this re-emergence really helping this next generation of Black designers?
I think it's really important to inspire people to know that you're not the first, that you come from this very rich legacy that was very impactful on American history and American fashion culture.
So many amazing gowns. And I have to say that the exhibition is now in book form. It's called the Anne Lowe American Couture. Lowe, you know, she was such an insider to a very small group of women who knew who she was. And oftentimes they said, you know, like, she was more creative than she was a businesswoman, because oftentimes women would say, no, I don't want all the embellishment. She's like, no, no, no. The dress calls for it. Therefore, you will have it. And therefore, she ended up cutting her profit margin
Right,
down.
by doing that. It was amazing to see those students, because their appreciation, how it grew in having to hand sew those details. It's almost like somebody, they didn't know about it first, and then to be able to try to replicate it, you realize that she had done so much.
Late 1973 saw the unexpected elevation of Gerald R. Ford to the vice presidency and later to the White House, a presidency defined by how he handled the looming prospect of a very high-stakes prosecution of a former president. As Scott MacFarlane shows us, the legacy of Gerald Ford and his most consequential decision, a presidential pardon, loom especially large in one Midwestern city.
Just a mile from the river near a bustling downtown, it turns out this old house in this old neighborhood might be the landmark of Grand Rapids, Michigan.
People sometimes just knock on the door and say, hey, we'd love to see you inside.
Oh, there's just people pull up and pictures all over the place.
A labor of love for Rob Kent and Tim England, who bought it 30 years ago and say they're not just the owners, but caretakers too.
There's a moral obligation to making sure that it's kept right.
Pictures here.
The house is historic because of the man who grew up here a century ago, America's 38th president.
I have learned already in this office that the difficult decisions always come to this desk.
Gerald R. Ford remains especially meaningful here, with his name plastered all around town. And 50 years after his unlikely ascendance to the vice presidency, no city in America celebrates his brief but tumultuous presidency like his hometown.
President Ford has granted Richard Nixon a, quote, full, free, and absolute pardon.
A presidency perhaps best remembered for one of the most controversial decisions in American history, Ford's pardon of his predecessor, Richard Nixon, who after Watergate and his resignation from the presidency faced the prospect of criminal indictment. Ford spared Nixon, and according to the new president's argument, the nation from the specter of a trial and the political upheaval it would bring.
He came into the office because he was thrust into the position.
Mirel Lutke is curator of Ford's Presidential Museum on the downtown riverfront.
He had to know a good chunk of America was going to hate this choice.
He absolutely did know that. Ford recognized that, he acknowledged it, and he still felt that it was the best thing for the country.
The pardon might have ended Ford's political career, cost him the 1976 election, but he said he never regretted it. It's also part of an unprecedented presidency that has made Ford a larger-than-life icon in this Midwestern city. A copy of the pardon is prominently and proudly displayed at the museum.
By pardoning Nixon, he is doing something deeply within character of the American spirit.
So's the pen Ford used to draft it. Even a life-size version of the Oval Office, where Ford made the decision in 1974, and where he received letters blasting or praising that decision, including a pat on the back from singer Johnny Cash, who wrote, "Remember that you can't do the will of God without getting a lot of people against you," and handwritten notes from children, including this one, saying Ford was half right and half wrong.
Has America's perspective on this changed in 50 years?
We have begun to kind of see what the larger picture was and where Ford was coming from with the pardoning.
In this politically purple area of a purple state, Stephen Ford maintains his dad captures the political and personal moderation that's common here.
When I look back on Dad's legacy of his very short presidency, same amount of days almost as John F. Kennedy, it's about healing. It's about healing the nation after Watergate, after the Vietnam War. It's about trying to restore some trust in the White House.
In a brutal cold in December 2006, they lined up throughout Grand Rapids to pay final respects at Ford's funeral.
It was about 10 degrees and the line was about 6 hours long.
And the love between Ford and Grand Rapids was mutual. He paid a post-presidential visit to that old house, proving he could still draw a crowd, including the new homeowners who say they adore being caretakers of the legacy of a man they call a caretaker president.
He took care of a horrible situation. That's what he had to do.
Not just a controversial decision of American history, but still a rich part of the history in this place that shaped him. For CBS Saturday Morning, Scott McFarland, Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Wow. So interesting. Nice job, Scott.
Yeah.
Enjoyed that.
And that letter from Johnny Cash. Wow.
Absolutely. And it takes a lot of courage to make a decision that you think the rest of the country will hate, but hope that time shows the wisdom of your decision.
Yeah.
Just off Heathrow's runway sits a building with a secret behind its glass doors. Tucked in the corner of the British Airways headquarters outside London is an AvGeek's dream.
This is kind of a secret museum. People don't necessarily know it's here.
One of the best kept secrets in the business.
Our guide for this stroll down BA's memory lane, Jim Davies, spent the better part of 4 decades at the airline and the last 20 years volunteering at the Speedbird Heritage Center. He also gave Queen Elizabeth a similar tour in 2019, so this is truly the royal treatment.
How big of a deal is a visit by the Queen?
The answer to your question is, it's mind-blowing. I shall never forget her walking down from the front of the building and even allowed me to crack a royal joke at her.
What joke did you tell the Queen?
Oh, Mom, I do wonder how you get through the security arch at an airport with your crown on. Really corny. The British aircraft, with 4
Davies
Rolls-Royce
likes to
engines
start with a model of the Vickers VC-10, a jet built in the UK that took Brits around the globe from 1964 to 1975, back when flying meant passengers in their Sunday best and hot meals with white coat service was the standard.
All this comfort nonchalantly enjoyed nearly 8 miles above the earth.
This predates email.
But it's pieces of history like this file, sealed for decades, that make this museum a true hidden gem. Inside it, all the work that went into arranging the 1952 trip then Princess Elizabeth was taking to Australia.
Now it was the sad homecoming of a young queen.
When she became queen upon the passing of her father, King George.
Queen Elizabeth II emerged.
And check out the hand-drawn charts tracking the plane's progress and its abrupt return to England, including this royal crown above the flight.
When you think of these people making the arrangements for this flight, and more the point, making the arrangements for her sudden return flight back to London as Queen, it's just really, I just love looking at these sort of paperwork. Quite unique. So this actual visitor's book...
The Heritage Center is also home to The Book.
One of our treasures, I think.
A very unique piece of aviation history. It's the guest book that's accompanied every royal flight on BA for decades, and marking each occasion is a royal signature. From Queen Elizabeth's travels with Prince Philip and their children, to then Prince Charles and Princess Diana.
Throughout this book, there are signatures. In this case, here's the Prince of Wales with Diana, and it's a wonderful record of royal flying. This is your first flight.
With one exception. When the Queen came to the museum.
She sat down at a table in our display room. Shall I sign here? Yes, please, ma'am, if you would.
You did a Royals flight.
I did, yes, the Queen.
Lorraine Longdon has been a flight attendant with the airline for 35 years.
That probably was one of the highlights of my career, especially now she's gone.
What stands out to you from that flight?
When the Queen and Prince Philip arrived at the aircraft, she drove herself. I wasn't expecting that because I was at the door waiting for them to come up, and the entourage arrived and she was driving this Range Rover.
Longdon also had a front row seat to a different kind of history, the Concorde. Starting in 1976, British Airways, along with Air France, flew the supersonic passenger plane that could travel up to twice the speed of sound. Cruising at 60,000 feet, it could cross the pond to New York in a little over 3 hours, with up to 100 passengers. But as you can see at the Heritage Center, you didn't get much of a view out of these tiny windows.
You had to love it to work on it because it was incredibly small inside, but it was wonderful. Every day it felt like the first day, you know, when you're really excited, because there was no other aircraft like it.
British Airways traces its history to the first regularly scheduled commercial passenger flight back in 1919, flying from London to Paris in about 2.5 hours.
Runway 27 right, clear for takeoff.
The airline we see today was formed in 1974, combining British Overseas Airways Corporation and British European Airways.
I don't know what
among the displays here,
isn't that great?
A lunch menu signed by Winston Churchill. He dined on smoked salmon, braised York ham, plums, and a cheese plate.
BOAZ jetted into high fashion.
And some of the museum's 130 uniforms dating back nearly a century, including kimonos, saris, and this paper dress from 1967. The bonded fiber was said to be fireproof and worn on flights from New York to the Caribbean.
To give the bit of the holiday feel, whatever, they put the girls in this paper dress.
It's actually made of paper.
Do feel it. You have my permission. You have my permission as a VIP guest.
VIP guest.
And rather ghastly shoes.
The shoes are very green.
It was a short-lived trend. But for Lorraine Longdon, the entire place has the feel of family. Her dad and brother worked at the airline for 30-plus years. She met her husband at BA, and her son is also a flight attendant.
What's it like for you when you walk through here?
This is all part of my life, really.
But you don't have to spend a lifetime at the airline to get in here. Admission is free. You just have to make an appointment online.
I do have a proud history, and it's very nice. I'm very privileged to be able to share it.
And don't forget to sign this guest book, the one reserved for visitors without a crown. For CBS Saturday Morning, I'm Chris Van Cleve outside London.